It starts with a question someone asks you in a room you're not supposed to be in. Not a dramatic room. No mahogany table. No flags in the corner. No one in a uniform. Just a windowless office that smells like recycled air and institutional coffee, furnished with the specific minimalism of people who have decided that comfort is a liability. The man across from you looks like an accountant. Soft hands, forgettable face, the kind of person you'd walk past in an airport and remember nothing about 30 seconds later. You will later understand that this is not an accident. He asks you one question. How comfortable are you with problems that don't have paperwork? You think about it for exactly long enough to show that you understood what he was actually asking. Then you say you're comfortable. He nods once, stands up, leaves. 3 weeks later, your life changes so quietly you almost miss it. Level 1. The unlearning. The first thing they teach you is that everything you already know is slightly wrong. You were good at your previous job. Exceptional, technically. The kind of operator who gets mentioned in briefings by people who never say names. You were fast, precise, reliable under conditions that would reduce most people to their component parts. You assumed this was why they wanted you. It was not why they wanted you. Speed is abundant. Precision is trainable. What they wanted was something harder to quantify and considerably harder to teach. They wanted someone who could disappear into the texture of a city, who could sit in a cafe for 4 hours and look like furniture, who could follow a target through 3 neighborhoods and leave no memory in a single witness. Your first surveillance exercise lasts 2 hours before you're made. The instructor shows you a photograph taken from across the street. It's you, mid-stride, looking exactly like a person who is following someone. You're told to try again. The second attempt lasts 90 minutes. You cross the street too quickly. Someone notices. Day 3, you look directly at the target. Rookie error, they tell you. Looking at someone is how you tell them they exist. By the end of the first week, you've learned something that will stay with you longer than any other piece of training. Confidence is visible. Nervousness is visible. The only thing that isn't visible is ordinary. You spend 3 weeks learning how to be ordinary, which is the strangest professional development of your life, and also the most useful. Level 2. The first city. Your first real assignment is in a city you won't name, in a country that officially has no idea you're there. Your cover is an industrial equipment consultant, which you selected specifically because no one has ever once in human history asked an industrial equipment consultant a follow-up question. The target is unremarkable by design. Middle-aged, well-dressed, the kind of man who appears in local business publications and community charity events. He has a driver. He has a routine. He has a restaurant he visits every Thursday at 7 p.m., where he orders the same thing and sits at the same table and meets, occasionally, with people who are careful about where they park. You spend 2 weeks learning the neighborhood before you learn the target. This is not what you expected, but turns out to be entirely correct. Cities have patterns the same way people do, and once you know the pattern, the anomalies become obvious. A car in a spot where cars don't park. A man who walks slowly in a neighborhood where people walk quickly. A meeting in a location that makes no practical sense unless the location is specifically chosen for sightlines. You eat at the same cafe 3 mornings a week. You nod to the same owner. You become, to the 6 square blocks that matter, furniture. On day 11, you see something that isn't in the file. You photograph it. You encrypt it. You send it through channels that would take a motivated expert several days to trace back to a building that officially doesn't exist. 4 hours later, you receive 2 words. Good work. This is, you will come to understand, the equivalent of a standing ovation. Level 3. The adjustment. Here is something they don't brief you on. The job is mostly waiting. Long, quiet, unremarkable waiting in places that smell like other people's lives. You drink a great deal of coffee. You read newspapers in languages you're still learning. You develop strong opinions about public transportation systems that you will never share with anyone. The actual moments of consequence are brief and relatively calm, which is somehow more unsettling than if they were chaotic. Chaos has adrenaline. Adrenaline is easy. What's harder is the quiet professionalism of doing something significant in complete silence in a crowd of people who have no idea, then walking to a taxi stand and going back to a hotel room that looks like every other hotel room. You order room service. You file your report. You sleep. The next morning you do whatever the next morning requires. You do not talk about this with anyone. This is not a hardship exactly, but it accumulates. You develop the particular communication style of someone who has spent years editing themselves in real time. Present in conversations, available, warm even, but always with a slight delay between thought and speech, where the thought is being checked against a list of things that cannot be said. Your family notices you seem careful. You tell them it's just work stress. They accept this because people generally accept explanations that don't require them to ask harder questions. Level 4. The real work. The problems that reach you are the ones that have already failed everywhere else. Diplomacy tried. Sanctions tried. Conversations in formal rooms, with careful language and mutual face-saving, and the particular optimism of people who believe that incentives are the universal solvent of human conflict. Sometimes they're right. When they're not, the file lands on a desk that doesn't officially exist, and eventually some version of it reaches you. You don't read the political history. You read the pattern. Where does the subject go? Who do they trust? What's the gap between their public schedule and their actual one? Every person, regardless of how careful they are, has a gap. The gap is where you work. Most of your assignments end without incident. A piece of information recovered, a meeting documented, a transfer interrupted through methods that leave no obvious fingerprints. The outcome exists. The mechanism doesn't officially. One job ends differently. You don't describe it, not because you can't, but because the description would be the least interesting part. What stays with you isn't the moment itself. It's the elevator on the way back down, looking at your reflection in the brushed steel doors, and feeling exactly as ordinary as you've trained yourself to appear. That's when you understand what the job actually costs. Not the risk, the distance, the practiced, necessary, professionally maintained distance from the weight of what you do. You get very good at not examining it. This is both your greatest professional asset and a thing you will eventually have to deal with. Level 5. The longevity problem. You are, by any reasonable measure, excellent at this. You've been at it long enough to have developed preferences. Certain cities over others. Certain covers that fit more naturally. A specific methodology for the first 48 hours in a new location that has never failed you. You've also developed, less usefully, a series of habits that would require significant explanation in any normal social context. You check exits when you enter rooms, not anxiously, just automatically, the way a chef checks the temperature before touching a pan. You sit with your back to walls in restaurants, which your dates have variously found intriguing, concerning, or both, usually in that order. You don't stay anywhere long enough to accumulate much. This is practical and also a little sad, which are categories that overlap more in this work than the recruitment materials imply. The question of when to stop is one you think about in the in-between times. The flights, the hotel rooms, the waiting. You don't have an answer. The work still feels necessary, which is the only honest reason you can give for continuing. The problems that reach you are real problems. The outcomes matter. Somewhere, a consequence exists that wouldn't exist without you. Whether that consequence is worth the accountant's life you didn't get to live is a calculation you've learned to leave open. Level 6. The exit. It ends the way most things in this work end. Quietly, administratively, with the specific anticlimax of a thing that was always going to happen eventually finally happening. A conversation, a handshake, a file closed. You get on a plane. Not to anywhere dramatic. Just home, which is a concept you've maintained at a distance for long enough that returning to it feels mildly theoretical. You unpack a bag that contains very little. You sit in an apartment that is clean and neutral and contains almost no evidence of who you are, which was practical for a long time and is now just a little empty. You think about what you're qualified for, which is a more complicated question than it sounds. The skills transfer. The history doesn't. Not to any resume that a normal company wants to read. You consult. Eventually. Security. Risk assessment. The industry term for people who know how problems develop before they become problems. The work is less consequential and considerably better for your sleep schedule. You eat at restaurants and sit in the middle of the room. You don't always check the exits. Somewhere tonight, in a city you'd recognize, a man who looks like an accountant is sitting across from someone in a room without windows. He's asking one question. The person across from him is thinking about their answer, taking exactly long enough to show they understand what's really being asked. In 3 weeks, their life will change quietly. They won't know for years what that actually means. You did. You'd probably do it again. That's the part you don't examine too closely.